So, welcome to the launch of the International MetaMasters in Phenomenology, Values-Based Clinical Care. This is an international master's level program. Just waving to you now, I'm Ashok Handa. I'm a vascular surgeon in Oxford and one of the co-directors. A very warm welcome to all of you. Next slide, please. So, housekeeping, I'm going to just welcome you and tell you a little bit about our program, and then I'm going to hand on to my co-directors, Guillaume Messers and Bill Fulford, and then you'll have an introduction to the faculty and a long period for question and answers. Next slide, please. So just to add a couple of things as far as housekeeping, if you have questions, please put them in the chat or save them for the Q&A session. Here are our three course directors. As I said, I'm Ashok Handa. I'm the director of the Collaborating Centre for Values-Based Practice based at St Catherine's College in Oxford. And the co-directors are Bill Fulford, who's the founding director of the centre, as well as a member of the philosophy faculty in Oxford, and Professor Guillaume Messers, who's also a member of the Collaborating Centre and a professor at Santa Casa de Sao Paulo School of Medical Sciences. We're going to, as you know, we're starting the MetaMasters over a 2-year period part-time, initially with 2 introductory sessions, and Prof. Messers will tell you about his introductory section, and I'm going to spend a few minutes telling you about the joint session that Bill Fulford and I will lead. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Vivian. Okay, so the introductory section will be an introduction to values-based practice, and I teach that to practitioners, including medical students within surgery. I'm based at this St Catherine's College in Oxford. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. Thank you. So our content will be really around the philosophy underpinning values-based practice, the practice of values-based practice, and other resources for further study. So next slide, please. So I want to hand on to Professor Guillaume Messers for his session.
Well, thank you, Ashok. Good morning, good evening, and good time in this moment, whenever and wherever of the world you are. I'd like to welcome you all, directors, faculty, and students of this first edition of the International MetaMasters program. As one of the directors of the program, I'd like to say a few initial words just to show you what this innovative and original and exciting, I might add, initiative is all about. I will make this initial presentation a bit from a personal perspective, just to show how this idea came about historically and where we'd like to get to with you. Well, the concept for this program was born from the intersection of 2 long-held ideas and I might say long-cherished dreams with a historical opportunity. Ironic as it may seem, as things usually are in life, the pandemic, by blocking the chances for international travel so far at least, opened room for this unusual acceptance of remote education, which I expected has no way back. Having this in mind, in February last year, in a remote conversation with Professor Bill Fulford, I suggested that perhaps it was time for us to dare something new, and that, from my part, would give full vent to these old dreams. So was born the idea of a course that Bill's inexhaustible creative mind, thank you, Bill, named MetaMasters. Then, what were these ideas or these dreams? They, in terms of phenomenology, which is my field. The first one is the desire to establish an international standard for the training of clinicians in phenomenology. A training that would go beyond its exclusive use as a tool in psychotherapy. I've always thought that this could give more consistency to this very important current that, although broad currently, is still very scattered and sometimes uneven in terms of quality. The second old dream that motivated this initiative from my part was the desire to enhance the impact of phenomenology in contemporary mental health, in contemporary clinical care, more specifically. I've always felt that despite phenomenology's great contribution to mental health, and even despite the new wave of interest we can see in the subject of phenomenology in the world currently, the influence of phenomenology mental health field, I think as a whole, remains very much restricted to small groups, still to small groups, and sometimes regarded as enigmatic or an arcane perspective of psychopathology, sometimes too philosophical. But more than this, I've always regretted that all the wealth of psychopathological knowledge in the field of mental health, just a moment here, has not so far been openly used for all dimensions of clinical care. And I mean that phenomenology should be used from pharmacological interventions to social psychiatry or social mental health interventions. As I will try to demonstrate in my upcoming next month masterclass, I defend that this can be done, the improving of the influence of phenomenology in mental health, through the notion of a dialectical phenomenology. Dialectical phenomenology is key for this ambition. I think this is in the next slide now, please. To accomplish this, I wanted to build on two successful experiences in terms of phenomenological training and international initiatives with the Values-Based Center. The first one is our 400-hour master's program in phenomenological psychopathology held here in São Paulo, Brazil, where I am now, at this program which I had. And we are now in the 80th year of this program, very successful program. Many of the students and alumni are here today of this program. The second successful experience was the 216 INPP conference organized and held by me here in São Paulo, along with Bill Fulford and Professor Giovanni Stangelini, who's also here with us today, in which we brought more than 300 delegates from all over the world to São Paulo. So my intention was to bring together the expertise of those people who are still with us as members of the faculty, with the enthusiastic interest of our students, to build a new idea, to build a new course. To carry out this idea, I needed a little help from my friends, and I was indeed very lucky. At that time, Professor Bill Fulford invited me to join the Values-Based Center, so as a lead for Brazil of the Values-Based Center. The Values-Based Center who's sponsoring as well this initiative. Since then, I've been able to count on the invaluable support of this internationally renowned institution and more, and drawing on its expertise in bringing together people interested in mental health and humanities from all over the world. This was crucial. But even more crucial was the moment when Professor Ashokanda, director of the VBC, joined us in the project. That was from the very beginning, I must say, adding to our intentions of building this course, his ability to conceive and carry out such a project. The approach, from my perspective, the approach with the VBC allowed me, just a moment, Christopher is saying, he's not sure if everyone can hear. Can you hear?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Can. Okay, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Local problem.
you can continue talking.
Good. The approach with VBC allowed me to get to know and develop more of what phenomenology had offered for me until then. That's very important. With the expertise of values-based practice, and more recently, shared decision-making, I've been able to see how phenomenology can participate in the most cutting-edge mental health agenda of a person-centered care. This is what I'd like to share with you in the next 2 years. In this context, we created this new concept in mental health training, the International MetaMasters in Phenomenology and Values-Based Clinical Care, which Cristobal is asking me to restart, try that.
No, Guilherme, you can continue talking. I think Cristobal was talking to
someone else.
Christopher. So I'll deal with the technical issues. If you can just, I will let you know if there's any technical problems, Guilherme.
Thank you. In this context, we created this new concept in mental health training, the International MetaMasters in Phenomenology and Values-Based Clinical Care. So what is our intention with this? In a nutshell, I could say that our intention is bringing together clinicians, researchers, and all those interested in the intersection between clinical care and philosophy, not only from phenomenology, my original field, but also from distinct fields, as you see in the program and faculty. We conceived the first cycle of this program as a first step towards an in-depth training in mental health, which can comprehend simultaneously the clinical practice and the philosophical foundations of mental health, offering a program that balances these two essential perspectives for a qualified training in mental health. In this way, we will hope to build together with all of you, pioneers like us in this new project, a community that embodies the values of plurality, complexity, equality, self-determination, freedom, and above all, democracy. A democracy intertwined with high-level technical training and philosophical principles. In the next slide, Vivian, just like to conclude by introducing the people without whom this project would not have come to light. First of all, the manager of this project, Vivian Pontes, who since INVP 216 has been showing her tireless and kind competence. Along with her, I thank also the kind and competent support of Mato Elacott and Mihir Sheth. I end up again welcome you all to this first cycle of MetaMasters International MetaMasters in Phenomenology and Values-Based Practice. And thank you for your attention. And I'd like to invite now, I think, Bill Fulford for his words. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guillaume. Bill, you're up next.
Very good. I'm just checking with Vivian if you're ready for me, Vivian. I think we're looking for the
just a second, please. I'm gonna share the screen again. Okay.
Yep. I'm getting a very good picture of Guillaume. Now I've got the VBP logo. I think it's this. Yes, it's. Thank you very much, Vivian. So my presentation is an overview, which I think is similar to some ways in Guillaume has just presented as a very excellent overview of the program. I wanted to dig down into a bit more detail. My first slide just reminds you that we do have a lot of detail already on the website, metamastersonline.com. And Vivian and me here are developing a new website, which will give even more detail and that we will be using for the running of the course. So I won't go through the details that are on the website, but if I could have the next slide, Vivian. So we've called it a MetaMasters because it's bringing together people working at master's level or above, both in clinical and in phenomenological and philosophical courses, to add an extra layer. So if you can imagine each of our courses as faculties that we'll be talking about in a moment are like the depth dimension of what we're learning, but we're adding to that depth dimension a cross-sectional dimension of international experience. So it's adding that extra level of international experience to individual faculty programs that makes it a MetaMasters rather than just a master's program. Next slide, please. Next slide, Ruben. So you've already met the three of us as course directors, and at the top here, Guillaume and myself, respectively working in phenomenology and philosophy. And below us, we have Ashok Handa, who you've seen a different picture of, and I've shown him here in his surgical gear for a reason that I will come to in a moment. Next slide, please. Of course, the philosophy and phenomenology are going to be very important to us in this program, and we're delighted that in addition to the familiar resources of analytic philosophy and continental philosophy, analytic philosophy and phenomenology, we have non-European philosophy represented. Verdi, I think you are with us today. I'm hoping that Venerable Hin Hung will also be with us. We have some slides from him. So we have both African philosophy and Southeast Asian philosophy represented strongly in the program. And it's part of that internationalism that gives us that extra level of international experience across the program as a whole. Next slide, please. But as Guillaume has already emphasized, this isn't a course important as the contribution of phenomenology, philosophy, and mental health is. This isn't a course just about mental health. It is about clinical care in general. And this is why, as Guillaume has already said, the contribution of Ashok Handa is so crucial. Ashok is a surgeon. On another occasion, I'll tell you how we came to be collaborating. I speak as somebody who, although I'm currently in the Faculty of Philosophy in Oxford, trained as a doctor and practiced as a doctor for many years, but I'm afraid I've failed at surgery. So I'm delighted to be working with Ashok. But what Ashok has brought to the program is that very important aspect that everything we're doing is not just about mental health. It is about clinical care in general. And Ashok, you've brought that dimension to the program already. And we're very grateful to you for that. And as we build up the program, I think you will all see how important that is going to be. Next slide, please. Guillermo, you were going to mention dialectics, and this will become important in the program. And Guillermo, I think you're going to be working on this in your own masterclass. But dialectical thinking has been important in phenomenology. And of course, it's important in philosophy generally, going back to the work of these two rather formidable characters. This is George Hegel and Johann Fichte, who between them really brought, so something's happened to the screen, Vivian?
Well, keep going, they're just trying to make it better.
Okay. These two characters brought the idea of dialectical thinking to a new level, and it was Fichte in particular who invented the triplet of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And the synthesis is what we need to be thinking about here, which is creating something new by integrating without elimination or reduction. So it's creating something new by a process of integration that avoids eliminating either side or reducing the importance of either side. Next slide, please. Can we see the next slide, Vivian? I'm going to give you the thesis next. So I'm wondering if we could make this a bit bigger, please, Vivian, because I can only see it in very small. I know what's on it, but the rest of our colleagues won't be able to see it unless we can make it larger. Could we make this larger, Vivian, and me here? No, I need to see these slides in a larger size, please.
Yeah. Yeah, just give me a minute.
And just go back one. Whilst this is being sorted out, I will confess to everybody that as well as failing at surgery, and perhaps for similar reasons, I'm a nightmare when it comes to technology. So I'm not surprised you're having trouble with my presentation, you guys. I have a weird effect on technology. I worked with Tim Thornton for many years, and Tim will tell you the same, that I'm the last person to be let anywhere near anything technological.
But I will never forget that you are a Trekkie.
Well, I'll come to that, Jimmy. So in our thesis,
the correct slide.
Yeah, thank you. In our thesis, antithesis, and then a synthesis. So a thesis is about the relationship between science and philosophy. And one idea is that when we have enough science, we don't need philosophy. This rather famous physicist, Stephen Hawking, in one of his pronouncements said, "Philosophy is dead," which is an odd thing to come from a theoretical physicist, as Stephen Hawking was Lucasian professor in Cambridge, because in Oxford, at least, the links between theoretical physics and philosophy are very strong. In the faculty, we have 60 full-time faculty members, of whom 20 are working on philosophy and physics, 20 are working in philosophy and psychiatry and the cognitive neurosciences, and 20 are generalists. So philosophy certainly isn't dead in Oxford, but this is one idea of the relationship between science and philosophy, that once we have enough science, philosophy disappears and is no longer needed. Well, Hawking was a very clever man, but I, of course, don't agree with him about that. What about the antithesis to this? Could we have the next slide, please? So one way of representing the antithesis to Stephen's idea that philosophy is dead is that when we have enough philosophy, we don't need the science, and that at the very least, philosophy should be an antidote or some kind of remedy for the ill effects of relying on science. We've seen this in our own field of philosophy and phenomenology and clinical care, with a view that now we have evidence-based medicine, we really have got all we need. But evidence-based medicine has failings, and phenomenology can be an antidote to the supposed failures of evidence-based medicine. So we have the thesis that we can have science without philosophy. With the antithesis, we have philosophy without science. And that brings us to the synthesis that sits behind this course. Next slide, please. So the synthesis is that we're creating, as Guilherme has described to us, what amounts to a new science. And it's a dialectical synthesis because it's a science that integrates evidence-based practice and values-based practice without elimination or reduction. They are equally important. The book on the left is a foundational volume in evidence-based practice written by David Sackett in Oxford when he was the founder director of the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine. The book on the right is a training course that Ashok Handa and his colleagues in surgery have developed. It's a template for any clinical area, and it's of course about values-based practice. So this bringing these two together side by side illustrates the synthesis of ideas that we believe sits behind this course. And next slide, please. But a new science, as we've already discovered, is tricky. This is another physicist, Max Planck, who many of you will know was one of the founders of quantum theory. And in his intellectual autobiography, Max Planck says that he's often asked what it was like to be in on the birth of a new science. And he said rather grumpily, I reply that new sciences aren't born, old scientists die. So we should bear in mind Max Planck's warning in moving forward with this new program. And next slide, please. And this is where we come, Giovanni, to the Star Trek image, because the synthesis, the new science that we're starting to build is really for the next generation. And we will have to be bold to go there. You know, in the famous phrase, to boldly go where no person has gone before. And final slide, please. And this is what we hope this MetaMasters will contribute to, building the next generation in philosophy, phenomenology, and clinical care through the concept of values-based practice as a partner to evidence-based practice. And that will be the basis for the new science that will drive healthcare in general in the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. So I just thought we might have a slight pause there for a moment and just to let everyone know. So here, I think what we've had from Guilherme is a background to how this project started, his original thinking behind it, and then reaching out to Bill and then to me in the Collaborating Center. And what we were very fortunate in doing was to have this amazing group of colleagues from around the globe who had worked either with Bill or with Guilherme at some point, and we thought would embrace this idea on the basis of being both trailblazers and early adopters, and at the same time with significant expertise in their areas, such that it would be very enriching. So I suppose in a way, the question I was asking myself when we were inviting colleagues to join us was say, who is the person that I would want to spend time listening to, because I know there's so much I would learn from them. And so what we're going to field for you over the next hour or so are the people who think are true leaders in this thinking across the globe, and we're so lucky and fortunate to have them, but we're also very lucky and fortunate to have all of you as participants in this inaugural cycle. And if I can just tell you that we have students also from across the globe. We've got 45 from Brazil, 5 from Poland, 19 from Italy, a handful from the US, also South Africa, a dozen or so from the UK, but also colleagues from Colombia, Ireland, Chile, Philippines, China, Ghana, Australia, Finland, Norway, and a number who haven't told us yet where they're from. But we very much hope that as the program develops and you come to the interactive sessions, that you will have a network, not just from the faculty from across the globe, but even more importantly, a network of co-participants from across the globe. And so just really to signal to you that we view both the faculty and the participants as this really true network, and hence our logo for the International MetaMasters of looking around the globe. Now, I think Mihir will tells me that the slides are now going to be working rather better, and what we've planned for you for the next 60 minutes or so is short introductions from our faculty, and each of them are going to introduce themselves, their institution, and just to give you a flavor of what their masterclass is going to be about, as a little mini taster to you, and hopefully enticing enough to attract you to come to all of those masterclasses. And we've deliberately made this program such that it's practical for you to attend from wherever you are in the world, over a very minimalist time commitment over the 2 years. And we are having a break halfway through to get feedback from you on how things are going. So I'm going to invite the first of our faculty, Anna Bergqvist, to introduce herself. So Anna, over to you.
Thank you very much. So my name, as you can see here, is Anna Bergqvist. It's a Swedish name, but I operate as an associate professor of philosophy at Manchester Metropolitan University in the UK. So here I coordinate both postgraduate research activities, and I also work collaboratively across various faculties. Outside my institution, I serve at the moment as the secretary of the World Psychiatric Association section for philosophy and humanities in psychiatry, and I also occupy a position as an executive committee member of the UK Royal College of Psychiatry. In relation to the faculty programme, I serve also as convener at the Values-Based Theory Network at St. Catherine. So I have been working with both Ashok and Bill for many years. My institution, which is Manchester Metropolitan University, is situated in the northwest of England. It's a fairly new university, and it prides itself with innovative research that matters to people and their communities. So on this slide, I've just given you the details of 2 projects that I am currently involved with. Okay, maybe we can go back to that slide.
Yeah, if we can go back to, that's it. Next slide, I think.
Yes.
No, this one.
Yes, perfect. So, and the reason why I wanted to pause on these projects is that the projects in question, they also inform the topic of my masterclass, which is all about lived experience as mechanism for agency, both morally speaking, but also in terms of social epistemology in clinical care. So I currently run a 4-year project in philosophy and public mental health, which focuses specifically on relationality in understanding the notion of subjectivity. It does so in 2 ways. So first of all, there is a focus on the impact of patients as stakeholder experts, or experts by experience, rather than individual vulnerability to mental ill health. So this is not an opposition to genetic psychiatry, for instance. It's very much one of bridging the gap. And secondly, I am involved in quite a large grant funded by the UK National Institute for Health Research, And this is a major 4-year project which is focused on improving the so-called Black experience under the Mental Health Act. And as part of that, I have a real interest in agency, in understanding precisely how we think about racialized experiences and so forth. Next slide, please. So the focus of my masterclass is moral agency, and I think of that in ways that moves beyond the individual subjective experience, or rather it's precisely one that speaks to the dialectical aspect of the programme, where indeed the very notion of agency is always relational. What I mean by that is that the very notion of lived experience in clinical care always is always situated within a wider framework of meaning. For instance, the projected work that I do on expertise by experience in mental health research and surrounding lived experience and patient and public involvement, that very discourse is itself part of wider political narratives within clinical care itself. So my masterclass is really about unpacking those relational dimension, both of experience itself, but also thinking forward by agency as mechanism for change. So what I've put here on the slide is that we have on the one hand an emphasis on the reality of the experience of mental health and illness for the historically situated experiencing subject. So it's precisely not a disembodied view of agency. Agency, as I suggested, always operates within a wider context. And then there is a very important philosophical emphasis on epistemological structures. And I think here specifically of agency as a mechanism for improving medical knowledge. And that in itself speaks to various challenges surrounding shared decision making and also co-production in attaining an informed and realistic view of stakeholders as knowers. So that's a kind of a political and also moral dimension of knowledge and knowing itself. And then the course will draw out precisely the implications of these discussions for improving practice. So I think of this as values literacy and perspective taking in medical education and professional development. And that is itself something that partly serves the function of destabilizing received wisdom as to what counts as the pervasive way of understanding some point of view. Destabilizing various meta narratives as to how the dialectical experience is to be understood. And that in itself I think of as mechanisms for addressing both epistemic injustice and also hermeneutic injustice in articulating both mechanisms for patient empowerment, but also that of peer support in self-management. So in a nutshell, the course is one that starts with a theoretical problematization of the concept of agency, but it does so in an interdisciplinary way by anchoring those conceptual discussions in relation to public and patient involvement in research. So it's very much a combination of that personal, subjective dimension of phenomenological practice, and that of science more generally, and thinking dialectically of that as mechanism for improving science. So that's the broad outline of my course.
Great, thank you so much, Anna, and of course we'll have time for questions on all the sessions later on. Delighted to introduce Professor Giovanni Stangolini. Giovanni, I'll hand over to you. Just waiting for.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good. Okay. So, good day, everybody. Thank you very much, Ashok and Bill and Guillermo, for organizing this MetaMaster. I'm really honored to be part of the faculty. My name is Giovanni Stangolini. I teach dynamic psychology and psychopathology at Chieti University in Italy. Chieti is somewhere in center Italy, about the same level or latitude as Rome, but on the Adriatic Sea. That's where I teach, but I live in Florence, and now I'm talking to you from Florence. And in Florence, I run the postgraduate school of phenomenological dynamic psychotherapy that I founded about 10 years ago with my colleagues here in Florence. As you can read in the slide, my main research interests are phenomenological psychopathology and philosophy of psychiatry. What does it mean? It means that I'm basically interested in describing the kind of life world people affected by mental disorders live in. What is a life world? A life world is the world as it appears in straightforward cognition, the world as we experience it from the first person perspective. And my research is about describing the life world inhabited by persons with schizophrenia, major depression, borderline condition, and eating disorders. And my masterclass will be on the life world of persons with eating disorders. I published some papers on this topic, and I wrote also a few books basically centered on this topic. And I'm very proud to say that I was one of the editors, together with Bill Fulfer, who was the leading editor, Verdi, and Tim Thornton, of the Oxford Handbook of Philosophy and Psychiatry. And more recently, I was the leading editor of the Oxford Handbook of Phenomenological Psychopathology. Anthony Fernandez, who is here with us today, is a co-editor of this handbook, and Marcin, who is here with us today, contributed with a chapter to the Oxford Handbook of Phenomenological Psychopathology. Next to my academic appointment, may I have the previous one? I still have to finish my previous slide, just a few seconds. I work as a psychiatrist and psychotherapist in my private office in Florence. Next slide, Vivian, please. Thank you. A few words about my institution, the D'Annunzio University in Chieti and Pescara. It is a huge university in Central Italy, which includes teaching programs for students in psychological basic sciences and clinical psychology, enrolling about 5,000 students. I am a member of the Department of Psychological Health and Territorial Sciences, which was born some 10 years ago from a scientific education and service project to the territory and the community. It is a largely interdisciplinary department, bringing together people sharing a common scientific, historical, I would say philosophical, and also in some sense political project aimed at serving citizens of Abruzzo. In our department, different scientific and disciplinary sectors integrate in a common object of research, which can be summed up as the knowledge of man in this territory through the investigation of physical, historical, psychological, anthropological, cultural, and social aspects. May I have the next slide, Vivian, please? Next and last slide, I will say a few words about the content of my masterclass, which is on values, on the values of persons with eating and feeding disorders. This is a research that we are developing in a clinical phenomenology lab in Chieti with, by the way, some of the students of this course, including Milena Mancini, who is listening to us right now. And this project on values in persons affected by so-called eating and feeding disorders builds on a view of feeding and eating disorders as passions, and my presentation will illustrate through personal testimony and materials available on publicly accessible websites, for instance, Pro-ANA websites, as well as building on clinical files of patients from my clinical practice, the nature of anorexia as a kind of religion that has explicit and implicit values held by people affected by anorexia and by eating disorders. I will try to describe in my masterclass which are these values of this religion that we call anorexia. And I will also try to explain how these values, all these values, have their origins in a cultural value called ocular centrism. That is a kind of society and culture that is based on the value of what is visible. In my masterclass, I will also show the limitations.
Giovanni, you have 1 minute left.
Right, and there, the limitations of this approach, but also further development, and especially clinical development and application of this model. And I will also outline the general phenomenological model within which the this idea of anorexia as a religion is set, the model is called the optical kinesthetic disproportion hypothesis, that points out that there is a disproportion between feeling oneself as a body and seeing oneself from the outside and through the gaze of the others, which in our view is the kernel of that condition that we call anorexia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. An exciting masterclass to look forward to. So next slide, please. Next, we have Michael Laughlin. Michael, I'll hand over to you.
Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah, the doggies are occasionally barking very loud in the background. So at some point I might hand over to them. You might have just a surreal introduction of just 5 minutes of dog barking, and you can kind of,
no problem.
As you wish. You know, you can say there was a lot in there if you read it right. But we'll see. They'll pipe down for the moment anyway. So right, okay, Michael Laughlin. I'm a professor of applied philosophy at the University of West London. So I mean, it says like about you. I don't know. I mean, I've been involved in sort of interdisciplinary debates for most of well, for all of my career really. I mean, I think it started off when I was I was asked to write a commentary for a journal on a policy document, a health policy document, and I sort of fell into this area by accident, because all I did was do this sort of standard philosophical Socratic thing of sort of saying what you mean, what you want about, why does that follow? And it turned out to be quite a controversial exercise, and I found myself being invited to go and address all these different professional groups and getting sent all these other things to analyse and do articles on, things like that. And it just became interesting to me, and it caused me to reflect on what supposedly the value of philosophy is as well. And so I wrote something quite recently for that, the Bloomsbury, Companion to Philosophy of Medicine on methodology in philosophy. And I was talking about philosophy as a dialogue and why that's, to my mind, is useful, and how that can help us bring all sorts of interesting issues to the fore. And I certainly think when I teach the master's students, I have, my sort of health students in master's degree, I have at least as much to learn from them as they have from me. It's not a matter of me telling them stuff and them going, oh, we've got it now. We're learning things. And I do think one of the big values of philosophy is just in asking naive questions. I've said something I wrote a few years ago, where the philosopher can sometimes be seen as useful if they're the person who's willing to ask the questions that others didn't want to ask for fear of appearing naive or ignorant. To say, but why does that follow? Why do we say that? And I think it can lead us to make certain underlying assumptions that we make explicit. And I think this relates to something Bill was saying earlier. We can sometimes find that things which seemed obvious, sometimes they are obvious, sometimes they're not. But guess what? Intellectual history didn't end at just the point when we rolled up on the scene. And practice and the problems of practice can have as much to teach us about where theory should be going next as vice versa. It's not a simplistic theory governs practice idea, that we have to have that to get that dialogue going and make our underlying assumptions explicit, sometimes to find that we like them as they are, sometimes to think we might want to change them in some ways, and sometimes to learn where we agree and where we differ. And if we do differ on something that's underlying and fundamental, what do we do about that? How do we figure out how to kind of get along and practice well despite our differences? So there are all sorts of issues that I think philosophy do, but I mean, I think I shouldn't say more, I should go on to the next slide. Because it says you say something about your institution and your course. So basically, I'm at the University of West London, the School of Biomedical Sciences. I'm involved in running something called the Institute for Person-Centered Health and Social Care. And there's a master's in person-centered health and social care. And we do put all the terms in. It sounds a bit jargonistic to put all those terms in, but I think it's important because it's looking at the relationships. It's again something I wrote a few years ago about remapping borders. It's about looking at the borders between health and social care and the relationship between the two. And we have a lot of interesting students who come along. Getting their interdisciplinary inputs to some of these debates is really important, to learn from each other, coming from different sectors. And as you will no doubt know, there's a big in this sort of in in the UK, but I think it's more, globally as well, but certainly NHS documentation, there's a lot of stuff now since the NHS long-term plan on personalised care. Shared decision-making is a big deal, especially with, there was a recent legal case in the UK, this Montgomery case, which some of our colleagues here have helpfully contributed. I edit thematic editions of the Journal of Evaluation of Clinical Practice. Some of our colleagues have put some interesting contributions in on this area, and the change from the notion of informed consent to shared decision making, and the notion of how this means getting patients more active and their representatives more active in certain decisions and what that means. And so we look in the degree about the implications of this for our revised thinking about what we mean about the concept of health and well-being, how we can implement these ideas if we can and put them into practice in a meaningful way, and sort of fundamental questions about complexity, uniqueness, value, how you incorporate them into a broader scientific account of what is, practice based on evidence and so forth, how you actually relate these two and look at the uniqueness of certain cases and what differences that can make in different cases. And so we've got a range of people, some from very clinical backgrounds, some from mental health backgrounds, and we try to figure out what sense we can make of these concepts, what the jargon means in practice. It's surprising to me, given that this is such a big deal in terms of policy documents are pushing this, that there's only 2 master's degrees in the UK that are addressing this. There's one in Edinburgh and one in London that are actually addressing this issue of person-centered care and what it means and how it relates to these issues of values-based practice and phenomenology. So I think, I could say more, but I think I should not keep people too long. I'll try and move on to the next slide if that's okay. So yeah, I talked to Bill about what he wanted, and he said he felt the title concepts of person-centered care was the best one. we have different understandings of what it means to be person-centered. This debate is still kind of ongoing, and in some ways that can be annoying for practitioners, because they're getting in, like with so many things, like being told your practice has to be evidence-based and so forth, but not getting clarity on what exactly that will mean in particular cases. Sometimes practitioners are told now they've got to be person-centered, and they will say, well, what exactly does that mean in terms of how we run our organizations and how we practice on a daily basis and so forth. And there are different understandings of it, but in a way that's good. It's a challenge, because it means to some extent the concept is up for grabs, and we can still help to define what it is, and to have an influence on what it is, and what's going to mean in practice. So there are issues about, there's a big thing about patient empowerment. So sometimes the term patient-centered care is used, and sometimes person-centered care. And one of the things people say is there a difference between the two? Sometimes they're used interchangeably, sometimes they're not. So we just got to kind of map how the language is used here. But certainly the move to person-centered came about because of this notion of patient empowerment, that we want to look at the agency of people who are receiving clinical care, for instance, that we want to think about
1 minute to go, Michael.
1 minute to go, okay. And so, the relationship with evidence and value. There are various models of person-centered care. So what I've just edited an edition on person-centered care, a volume on it, and some people there were criticizing certain approaches to person-centered care for being too consumerist. If you think of a certain way in which evidence, if you think of practitioners supplying evidence and patients supplying values, there are issues and problems with that, which we can talk about in some detail in the thing and the actual presentation. And so things like relational models of the person, how we build in, importantly, in person-centered care, the persons of practitioners. What about practitioners' values and their perspectives? How are they built into the process of shared decision-making? And of course, the important issues which Anna raised, I think, as well, phenomenology and patient expertise, the sense in which you're a patient on you're an expert in your own life and values, and what difference that makes in specific cases. And there's some cases where it's actually much more difficult than you might think to actually build in what that means and how we should take note of that. And generally, the negotiation of value differences between the carer and the practitioner, where we have them, where we have different approaches, how do we spell them out and make them clear and understand each other and move forward? So there's a number of issues that it's worth talking about. The dogs is barking now, so that's signaling that perhaps I should come to a close.
So difficult to stop, Michael, I'm afraid, so we'll carry on. Thank you so much. Next, we're delighted to have the Venerable Hin Hung, who's going to talk about Dharma therapy. So next slide, please.
Hello.
Handing over to you.
Hello, I'm Hin Hong from Hong Kong. Of course, I'm a Buddhist monk, ordained under the Mahayana traditions, meaning the type of traditions that flow to China and Japan and Tibet. I'm also one of the lineage holder of Lin Qi and Huayang school of Chan meditations. Basically, I'm more or less supposed to be a good teacher in meditations. Apart from being a Buddhist monk, I helped the University of Hong Kong started the Center of Buddhist Studies. I also served as one of the directors for 10 years in the center. Currently, I'm officially retired, but I am still the senior fellow of the center and chairman of the Master of Buddhist Counseling program. I have published books on Buddhist counseling and psychotherapy. We did a lot of research into meditation using neuroscience research methodologies like EEG and fMRI. We published some papers on what happened to your mind when you meditate, when you do mindfulness practice. And we also we published some papers on how your minds work when you chant repetitiously or the religious names of your beliefs. And I also do Buddhist education for high schools. And the current research work I'm working on is called Awareness Training Program, Dharma Therapy. Awareness Training Program is a group-based interventions. We integrated Mahayana Buddhist teachings into psychotherapeutic interventions, a group-based intervention, and we call it Awareness Training Program. We published a paper on that, and the talk that I will be introducing to you is called Dharma Therapy. It's also a one-to-one therapy for people with psychotherapeutic problems, and basically that's what I do. Okay, and I also do some Buddhist teaching research, like the Guangdong Yuga Yimhao is the part of Buddhist teachings. So I do a whole lot of things, but the thing that I think that you would be most interested is on Dharma therapy, which I'll be introducing to you a little bit after the next slide. Can I have the next slide, please? The institution that I'm working for is the University of Hong Kong. Of course, the University of Hong Kong is one of the top universities here in Asia. And I work in the Center of Buddhist Study in the university. This center I'm one of the founding fellows. We founded the center back in 2000, in the year 2001 and 2002. And in the center, we promote the study and research into all aspects of Buddhism and how Buddhism is relevant in today's world. Of course, you know Buddhism is one of the oldest religions, more than 2,500 years, but it's still relevant in today's world in many respects, not only as a religion, but now that's all very popular all over the world. The practice of mindfulness, of course, that came from Buddhism, Buddhist teaching or Buddhist practices. The center that we are working on, the Center of Buddhist Studies, is one of the largest Buddhist study center in the world. We offer a PhD program. We have 2 master level programs, one Master of Buddhist Studies and one Master of Buddhist Counseling. I think the Master of Buddhist Counseling program is one of the, I think there's one similar program in the University of Toronto, integrating Buddhist teachings and psychotherapy or psychology. And we are the other one in the world that offer a master program in Buddhist counseling. Apart from the Master of Buddhist Counseling program, we also have a professional diploma on Buddhist counseling, where we train and equip the students to become professional Buddhist counselor. And this is a new program. We just launched it last year. This is all very new to us, and obviously it's also rather new to the world. I'm very happy to hear Bill or Professor Fulford mention that the evidence-based program and integrating that with value-based practices. We are integrating evidence-based practice with Buddhist teaching-based practices.
We just have 1 minute to go.
Okay, so the next slide, please. And the class, the material I'm teaching or introducing to you is the Dharma therapy, which is a therapeutic model based on Buddhist enlightenment experience. During the talk, I will briefly introduce the theoretical foundation of the therapy and explain how the Buddhist examination of suffering and the path to ending suffering could be applied in a step-by-step manner during counseling. So there's 7 steps that into the therapy, and we are now applying it in the clinical practices and with very encouraging results. And there's now 2 centers in Hong Kong that is using Dharma therapies as a mean to help people with psychotherapeutic, also with psychological difficulties. So that's what I have to say. And there's 7 steps to Dharma therapy. If you are interested in how Buddhist teachings can be integrated into therapeutic interventions, then come and listen to my lectures, and I hope that it will be enlightening to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable Hin Hung. Really very enticing and some full of, if I can say, Eastern promise. So thank you very much indeed. So now we're going to move continents again, and our great pleasure of introducing Professor Verdi van Staden, who's from South Africa. Verdi, over to you to give us a very different flavor again. Verdi, are you having trouble with your microphone? Okay.
Good. Hope it's better. Professor of Ethics.
That's better.
Of Health Sciences. I'm also checking. Is there still a problem? Is there still a problem?
We're still having a little bit of background feed in there.
That's strange.
That's better. Go for it.
Okay, I've muted and unmuted again. Perhaps the trick. So yes, also editor for the philosophy psychology.
It might work better if you turned your camera off and just have your sound.
So it seems like we have a connection issue with Verdi right now in the connection to Zoom. So if this doesn't work, we might want to move on.
Okay. So Verdi, just try now.
Alternative is we could present Verdi's slides for him.
Is it better now?
Yes, much better.
Okay, I've put off the video. Perhaps that does the trick. And I think you've already probably read that slide. My interest being in values-based practice and African concepts, specifically for this program. Next slide, please. Next, yeah, thank you. So about the University of Pretoria, where I'm hosted, this is one of the large research-intensive universities of South Africa with more than 70,000 students. I'm directing a program in philosophy and ethics of mental health, a master's program, with students from various places in the world, participating through distance learning or e-learning, whichever term you prefer. Just some of the topics of current and recent PhD students that I have been supervising, various very interesting topics, I reckon. And you probably may read that yourselves about decision-making algorithms and applying the Mental Health Care Act and incapacity assessments, phenomenological study on anomalous experience of others and early onset schizophrenia, agenda of steadfastness and its measurement in relation to temperament and character, invigoration in evolutional schizophrenia and also among social media respondents, how we measure that, and also as a therapeutic intervention, values underpinning response to anticipated reproductive cloning and gene editing, practical and ethical framework for integration of spiritual aspects in health practitioners consultation, and a more recent study that is due to begin on reciprocal efficacy training. Next slide, please. So the content of the masterclass will be introducing you to various African concepts, specifically Ubuntu, Batupele, and Indaba. And these concepts will be applied to clinical case studies as an extension of AS-based practice, bridging individualism and communitarianism, and articulating processes for practical decision-making, particularly when values clash. The clashes may be, of course, between clinician, patient, family, community, and society. And the idea is to do so without adopting some kind of ethical relativism or without proclaiming I'll do whatever the patient wants, or then alternatively, as some practitioners sometimes feel themselves compelled to do, is to say, well, I offer this, take it or leave it, which is basically both would be ways to sign up to some kind of eroding the integrity of professional integrity of what one actually stands for as a practitioner. That's all. Thank you very much. Back to you, Ashok.
So, Ashok, one of the challenges of being a clinician is that your life is unpredictable, and Ashok's just been called to deal with something and has asked me to take over. Could I just check if people can hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, so I will hand over to Tim. Tim and I worked on the Philosophy and Ethics of Mental Health program at Warwick many years ago. And Tim, we're really delighted that you're involved in this program, and let me hand over to you to tell us about your background and what you're going to contribute.
Thank you. Could I have the next slide, since I have a placeholder first slide? So this is me. I'm Tim Thornton. I'm a professor of philosophy and mental health and deputy head of the School for Research in the School of Nursing at the University of Central Lancashire. I'll say a little bit about where that is in the next slide, because I think there's something really interesting about the fact that we have this international and geographical spread. And so although it's merely contingent, I think it gives a real sense of insight into the programme. My research, before it was halted by a chance encounter in the corridor with Professor Bill Fulford, who dragged me kicking and screaming to discuss the philosophy of psychiatry and mental health care, was quite smoothly and happily in the philosophy of thought and language in an Anglo-American analytic philosophical style. And I have particular interest in such philosophers as Ludwig Wittgenstein, a huge colossus of the 20th century, and John McDowell, a contemporary philosopher who's very influential. The reason for mentioning them is that they advocate a non-reductionist approach to philosophy and what we might find out there in the world. So although I hail from a philosophy of science department originally, my work tries to stress the idea that there are features of the world that are real, whether or not they can be reduced to a natural scientific account. And that influences the work I do on conceptual issues in mental health care. So I'm broadly interested across the board, and I've given some examples here. I'm interested in clinical judgment, in whether there could be such a thing as ideographic judgment or ideographic understanding, and what, if any, its relation to narrative understanding might be, in the interpretation of psychopathology across the board, and in the question of reductionism and the possibilities of social constructionism in psychiatry. So some broader issues that have particular application when one's thinking about mental, especially mental health care, but also healthcare more generally, and psychiatry. And I've listed some books here to really basically just to re-stress the way in which my philosophy of mental health work is grounded in a certain sort of philosophical stance. Could I have the next slide, please? So I'm based at the University of Central Lancashire, which is not very far from Anna Bergqvist's university, and like hers is a new university. But we do like to say that we were founded in 1828, so not as new as all that. We were founded as the Institution for the Diffusion of Knowledge, later becoming Lancashire Polytechnic, later becoming the University of Central Lancashire when the then government abolished the distinction between polytechnics and universities in the UK. And at the University of Central Lancashire, with my very bright colleague, Gloria Iob, I run a 3-year e-learning or distance learning part-time MA program in philosophy and mental health, which was originally based on the Oxford textbook of philosophy and psychiatry that Bill Fulford oversaw, and I contributed some small elements to, and more generally now looks to the growing wealth of material coming out of the interaction between philosophy and psychiatry. Perhaps I could have my final slide, please. So in my masterclass, which will be coming up in just a second, which is called Tacit Knowledge and Clinical Judgment, with the teasing subtitle, Paradoxes for Theory, Necessities for Practice. I wonder who helped come up with that as an interesting slogan to try and stimulate interest in a subject which can look somewhat dry. What I'm thinking about is the relationship between two approaches to knowledge. So in outline, what the session will look at is, first of all, what there could be by way of a distinction between tacit knowledge, which is an approach to knowledge popularized really by Michael Polanyi, the chemist turned philosopher of science at Manchester University in the middle of the 20th century. Popularized by Michael Polanyi, but his account of it is problematic in certain sorts of ways. The relation of tacit and explicit knowledge. Now, we're familiar with explicit knowledge from the way in which psychiatric diagnosis is the very model of an attempt to make knowledge explicit via its operationalism. So I want to think a little bit about how that might work and how successful that could be, and raise at least this possibility, a possibility that has been stressed by quite a number of psychiatry critics of operationalism in psychiatric diagnosis, which is, despite the attempt to make all the knowledge explicit, there remains a necessity for a tacit dimension in diagnosis. Well, that's all very well, but what is tacit knowledge? And at this point, I will reveal a blindingly brilliant, a moment of surpassing genius when I draw out a surprising dilemma for any account of tacit knowledge. And I'm not going to tell you what it is now, but using that enables me to try and persuade you of this as an idea about what tacit knowledge is. It's conceptually structured. So it's something that happens at the level of the whole person. It depends on being a possessor of concepts, but it's context specific. One's concepts can only be actualized in the context. And thirdly, what gives it content is that it's practical. That's how it can be a form of knowledge. And then I will try and articulate how this solves two issues that might naturally fall out of puzzlement about psychiatric diagnosis. And below, in order to, like a snake oil salesman, I've put some spurious, as it were, qualifications to lead the session below. But it'll be huge fun. Anyway, okay, thank you.
Tim, thank you very much for that. I hope you can hear me all right. As I said, I've had to take over from Ashok for a few minutes, and it's wonderful to hear how your work and ideas have been developing since we worked together all those years ago. I hand over now to Marcin, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Marcin was with us in the faculty in Oxford. And Marcin, I think you took part in the first summer school in this field. So again, we have a bit of a track record of working together, and delighted to hear how successfully you've set up your new department in Poland. And over to you to hear about you and your program and your masterclass.
Thank you very much, Bill. I hope you can hear me, and hopefully you can see me as well. So my name is, actually my name is Marcin Moskalewicz, but I'm well used to being Marcin Moskalewicz. You can address me by either of the names. I still am primarily, or I used to be, I should rather say, a philosopher of science, but I gradually moved to medicine and medical sciences, psychiatry in particular. I worked in several institutions, not merely in Poland and Oxford, as Bill Fulbert mentioned just a moment ago, but I also studied at Berkeley, and I work as a Fulbright scholar at Texas A&M, and more recently also at Zurich. And my work is following the pattern that also Bill introduced at the beginning, speaking about the synthesis. I used to call it a bridge between phenomenology, which is about structures of lived experience, to put it briefly, and science, which is about objectified knowledge. And my current research is, in this sense, transdisciplinary. I'm trying to build bridges through applied phenomenology in mental health care, not just in mental disturbances, but also in chronic diseases where mental health is relevant, cancer in particular. So this is applied phenomenology, also using scientific means, which are a language much more understandable around the globe, if I may put it this way, than philosophical language. So with the hope it might have some larger appeal. Can I have a next slide, please? So a few words about my institution. My principal institution is Poznań University of Medical Sciences, which is in Poznań in Poland, Western Poland. As you can see on the little map, is somewhat halfway between Berlin and Warsaw. And that's a public school, public medical school. And it means something different than in the United States. It's mainly in Eastern Europe. In Poland, it means it's better than a private school. But we also have a private, we're also on the market. We have a lot of international students. It's pretty international from all over the world. Altogether, we have about 7,000 students and about 1,000 internationals, and they become graduates practicing medicine all over the world. Most of them from Taiwan, Sweden, Norway, Germany, United States, Canada. And within this school, I run a unit which is based in a larger department of social sciences. The unit is specifically working in philosophy of psychiatry. It's called Philosophy and Mental Health Unit. and it is the first of its kind in Poland. We're trying to implement values-based practice and phenomenological psychopathology in the teaching curriculum as well as in research. And I will just mention the other institution I collaborate with. I lead the network, Phenomenology and Mental Health Network, and the collaborating Center for Values-Based Practice, together with Giovanni Stangalini, who was speaking at the beginning, and also Richard Gibbs from Oxford. And that's a network which is global, and it has over 100 members from 20 countries, and we are growing. A lot of the members of the network are here, about 10, I guess, as students, and we hold workshops and meetings now online. It used to be in Oxford, but now due to coronavirus, we moved online. Next slide, please. So I'm scared I'm running out of time, and I'm going to speak about time, and that's what my master class is going to be. And well, on this slide you have 6 puzzles, because time is a puzzle. But I'll just introduce it briefly. When I say time is a puzzle, it means even if we intuitively feel what time is, once we think about it, we get lost, because the concept has several meanings that overlap. So if you look on the upper left, these are gifts. Some of them should be moving. I'm not sure if they're moving on your screen. But the Earth that's orbiting the sun and it's spinning, as we are talking right now, is the one sense of time, which of course is responsible for our circadian rhythms. If you go to the slide below and you see the calendar and the clock, you speak of time in a different sense, in the sense of some objectifying measures. But the fact that our bodies are regulated by the cosmic rhythms is independent of what we think about time, of whether we think about it or not, because it's all unconscious. Then in the middle, you should see a little child growing old. I'm not sure if it's moving. It doesn't move on my screen. But this is a different time yet. It's a biological time of growing older. If you could go back to my slide. We're all getting older, and we have a certain biological age. This is the age of our bodies. But regardless of that objective, if you like, biological age, we also may feel as being of a different age. So I'm 40, by the way, but I can feel 20 at times, and I indeed do, but there are days when I feel like I'm being 60. And this felt sense of how old I am is not determined by my biological age. So it's yet a different meaning of time. And finally, you have the experience of past, present, and future, which is a different scheme, if you think about it, than the calendars and the clocks that were on the bottom left slide, because it's within that distinction, we are always in the present, as we are right now, and we always live towards the future. We have an open horizon of the future, and we also have something that we leave behind, which is the past, which you don't find on the calendar or on the clock. And this somehow happens all in your mind as you move along the linear time of your biological age and through the circular time of, or the cosmic time of the orbiting Earth. Now, all of these dimensions can become disturbed. They can become transfigured in mental illness. And this is going to be the content of my masterclass. Now, the picture on the right bottom is a famous picture by Salvador Dali, but it's not the persistence of memory. It looks very much similar to that one. It's 20 years later, 23 exactly, from 1954, painting a small in size, entitled "The Disintegration of the Persistence of Memory." Memory indeed can be persistent, but it also can disintegrate. This disintegration of lived time and
could be finished in 1 minute, Marcin.
1 minute is perfect. 1 minute of clock time. So this disintegration can affect all the dimensions I just mentioned. You can be lost in clock time, in the calendar, as in dementia. Your circadian rhythms might be disturbed, as in bipolar. Your sense of your age may be affected in delusions. The content of your experiences of past and future might be also disturbed and disfigured in schizophrenia, in addictions.
Marcin, I'm afraid we're definitely running into time issues now.
Time issues, yeah.
Yeah.
Now you can see why I'm working on time. I'm always lost in time myself. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the masterclass next year.
So next slide, please. And Bill, if you could take back over, thank you. So Adriana Hollande, if you want to take over, thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very grateful to be here and very honored with you. I'm a psychologist. I work as professor of the Federal University of Paraná in Curitiba. Here in Brazil, I'm editor in chief of 2 journals, one on phenomenology and another one of clinical psychology. And I work with several topics, mainly phenomenology in Husserlian way, clinical psychology, and other subjects like psychology of religion, epistemology, and history of psychology and phenomenological research. And finally, with health disease processes, psychopathology, and mental health. Next slide, please. Well, here I'm coordinating a laboratory, named a Laboratory of Phenomenology and Subjective. That's a research group at the psychology department. And we hosted since 2009 one of the most meetings in phenomenology in Brazil. I invite all of you to be with us in July in the 3rd International Congress of Phenomenology and Psychology. Next slide, please. I will try to discuss with you my content of masterclass, and namely phenomenology as probabilities to a clinical psychopathology. I will try to discuss with you phenomenology as a criticism of traditional clinical models of psychopathology and therapeutics, in direction to bring reflections about suffering and crisis, and the way of the idea of that sufferer exists reading Paul Ricoeur. We try to discuss clinical psychology as a care of the suffering being, and we understand phenomenology as an epistemological approach to think about health disease processes, mainly in the direction of the subjects by normality, and disease, reading George Canguilhem. So I'm very grateful to be with you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Adriano. That's going to add a very important dimension to the program. And finally, like to hand over to Anthony Fernandez, who is speaking to us from North America. Anthony, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
You're coming through loud and clear.
Perfect. So I'm still kind of waking up. It's about 8 in the morning here. But I'm Anthony Fernandez. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy at Kent State University, which is in Northeast Ohio near Cleveland. And I'm also a part-time research fellow in the Faculty of Philosophy at the University of Oxford. So while all of my background is in philosophy, I've been working in the area of philosophy and psychiatry probably since the end of my undergraduate degree and through all of my graduate career. So again, while all of my degrees are in philosophy, pretty early on, I started collaborating with psychiatrists and clinical psychologists. And as Giovanni mentioned earlier, I'm also the co-editor, one of the co-editors of the Oxford Handbook of Phenomenological Psychopathology, and I've contributed a few different chapters to that volume. So the main area that I've worked on here, although some of my work focuses on phenomenological studies of specific disorders like depression or bipolar disorder, most of what I've done is focus on broader methodological issues and how we can take resources from philosophical phenomenology and then apply those resources to fields outside of philosophy. And the main approach that I take here is figuring out how we can use the kind of conceptual clarification that phenomenologists develop to inform or guide research and also practice outside of philosophy. So most of that has looked at how phenomenological research might inform or guide psychiatric research, psychiatric classification and diagnosis. But more recently, over the past couple of years, I've also been involved in a collaborative project with Dan Zahavi on phenomenological applications in nursing. And now some of that is also kind of veering back towards psychiatry and also neurology. So thinking about how we can use concepts from phenomenology in order to better understand patient experience more broadly. So I think we can jump to the next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, my primary position is at Kent State University, and again, that's up in Northeast Ohio. And our department there is pretty pluralistic. We have people who work in analytic philosophy, continental philosophy, Africana philosophy, philosophy of the cognitive sciences, feminist philosophy, and a whole range in the history of philosophy. So we cover pretty much all the areas there. And importantly, in the past couple of years, we've just founded at the university a Brain Health Research Institute. And that's an interdisciplinary research center that's meant to bridge departments or bridge kind of faculty who work on brain health from a variety of departments, including biology, psychology, philosophy, English, and so on. And it's still kind of, I guess, in its early stages. It's just a couple of years old, but luckily we have things like pump priming or kind of startup grants. So hopefully that'll increase the amount of interdisciplinary work in philosophy and psychiatry that's occurring at Kent State over the next few years. So we can jump to the next slide on the masterclass. Okay, so I had mentioned one of the main areas that I work on is phenomenological applications in psychiatric classification and psychiatric diagnosis. So that's what my masterclass will focus on. And I think there will be two parts to the course, or two parts to my class. The first part will give a broad overview of how phenomenology has informed current approaches, or how phenomenological research today is intended to inform current approaches to psychiatric diagnosis and psychiatric classification. So that'll overlap a bit with also what Tim Thornton was talking about earlier with operationalism. So thinking about how phenomenological research might inform our kind of current operational approaches, how it might help us refine the symptoms that we use, or our understanding of the symptoms that are used in current diagnostic approaches. And also talking about typification as it's used in diagnostic procedures. Now, after providing a kind of broad overview of that approach, I'm also going to spend some time talking about the potential for phenomenology being integrated with new or novel approaches in phenomenological classification, or sorry, in psychiatric classification. So one of my general concerns here, in thinking a lot about how we should best bring phenomenology together with psychiatry and with other scientific fields is that I think we need to make sure we're paying attention to novel developments in those fields and keeping an eye on the direction that these fields are moving, so we can make sure that the way in which phenomenologists are doing research is at least has the potential to align with the directions that those disciplines are moving. So in the case of psychiatric classification, one of the interesting moves of the past few years is that there's a lot of dissatisfaction, not only with the current diagnostic categories that we're using, but with the idea of using operationally defined diagnostic categories in general. And because of that, there are some institutions, including the National Institute of Mental Health in the US, that's pushing to move toward what they call dimensional classifications. And these are currently only being used in research. They're not being used in clinical practice, but I think ideally they might inform the way in which we use psychiatric categories in clinical practice as well. So I'll talk a bit about the potential for altering and revising how we do phenomenological research in order to make sure that we're kind of keeping up with and running in parallel with novel approaches in psychiatry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. And that completes our presentations from our faculty members. And thank you all for very, very rich and what promises a very exciting program of presentations. As everybody will see, having heard those presentations, we are now in a position where we're able to offer this very rich international program. Of course, we hope our students will collaborate in all the ways that you would know more about than me through WhatsApp groups and so on, so that we build a community of colleagues working around the world in this interdisciplinary collaborative way.